Hi, my name is John Poole. This is my presentation on hepatitis C and the cognitive effects that it has on a person. Before we begin, I think we should do like a little, definition of what hepatitis C is. And it is an infection that is caused by a virus that attacks the liver and leads to inflammation. It is considered the most dangerous of the hepatitis viruses and is spread through contaminated blood. There are approximately 170 million people that are chronically infected with HCV, with 3 or 4 million added each year, and in the U.S. alone, there is 4 million people that are HCV positive, and the number increases as each year goes through. For my research, the idea behind the research is that there have been a lot of information and studies that have been committed, but none of them seem to kind of coincide with each other, or they all kind of contradict each other. A lot of focus has been placed on how does HCV enter the body and manipulate it as it does. And that is the hypothesis is that it's steroids, that it attaches itself to a virus so that it can pass through the body undetected, and then once it gets into the central nervous system, it just starts manipulating or multiplying in there, which is very similar to how HIV is ran or functions. There have been multiple studies on it. The three that were mentioned in the study with me was the McAndrews study, which is mild cognitive impairments, was what he found as a conclusion of his research. Bielauskas, which was another researcher and his team, they did over 150 positive HCV positive people, and they determined that 30% of those individuals were impaired in mental flexibility, abstract reasoning, and concept formation. And in a final study done by Cordova, his team found out that HCV positive individuals were associated with mild deficits, but they were in verbal response and verbal fluency. One of the very few studies to signify that. The only thing that I can gather from the studies is that HCV does have a negative effect on a person's cognitive development or functions, but to what degree is the question that's left to be answered. For my study, the researchers participated, they recruited from the HIV Neurobehavioral Research Center because there was a study going on with HIV and HCV and methamphetamines already, so they just chose from that pool of qualified individuals. The individuals also were enrolled in the National Institute of Drug Abuse Program project. The project was examining the effects of the central nervous system with use of methamphetamines, HIV, and HCV. For this study, the qualifications, there was a lot of restrictions that the researchers who wanted to apply onto a person. That is, they had to be HCV positive, but HIV negative. They could not be on any treatment for HCV as of yet. They could not have or currently struggle with any methamphetamine abuse or dependency. They could not have a history of chronic, severe, or recent substance abuse and dependence, could not be diagnosed with major depressive disorder. They could not have a history of schizophrenia, whether themselves or their family. They could not have any head trauma that resulted in loss of consciousness greater than 30 minutes, and they could not be diagnosed with any neurological diseases. Demographically speaking, the ones that were chosen were 34 positive and 35 negative. The age range for the HCV positive were around 48 to 50, and the HCV negative was around the 38 to 40 range. In both groups, males was the majority, at making up at least 56% in each respective. Caucasian was the majority race. Respectively, they made up 71% of the positive and 66% of the negative. And all of the participants on average had at least 1 year of college education. For the procedures, the researchers stuck to 4 different types of assessments. The first one would be the FRSBE scale, or the Frontal Systems Behavior Scale. And this scale raised a lot of controversy with the study because it's can be limited, but that goes into detail a little bit further. It's a 46 question behavior rating scale that the individual themselves rate themselves on. The questions are the 6th grade reading level, so it's not to confuse or complicate any complications or anything for individuals. There are family and individual tests available. The test itself breaks down the scores into 3 levels: apathy, disinhibition, and executive dysfunction. The second test was a neuropsychological assessment, which was, again, the individual rated themselves. The third assessment was a CIDI, Computer International Diagnostic Interview. This was the only assessment that the researchers assisted them with because it was computer involved. And the last one was Activities of Daily Living Scale, where, again, the individuals rated themselves on different household activities such as housekeeping, home repairs, bathing, dressing, laundry, buying groceries, cooking, transportation, and employment. The results were that on an individual basis, HCV positive people outranked HCV negative individuals in every category they were based on for every assessment. On a group basis, HCV became more averaged, and they only substantially outranked HCV negative people in apathy only. So it did show that they do receive some kind of faultiness, I guess, or some disruption in cognitive functionality, but they are still able to come together to meet their norms on an intermittent basis. The conclusion of the story, of the study, was the strength and the weakness. They did have a great variable control with the negatives. They did have it was a small size, but it was only 34 positive and 35 negative, and the 69 individuals, which was small for such a big idea or a big area, but they can only do so much with so little people. The power was given to the participants, meaning they were the judges themselves over their own actions. There were no before and no after comparison conclusions, whereas this is what the attitudes and the personalities were before the diagnosis. This is what they were afterwards. And that's important just because a lot of individuals don't go through HCV symptoms, so they don't know that they're positive. So other than blood work. So if one of the questions revolved around being anxious or nervous about losing memories or developing dementia, then if they didn't know that they were having memory issues, they didn't know what to look for, so they could not report it. The improvements that I had personally were just additional staff to increase the sample size of the population polled, control over participants where you didn't have to take what they said for a resolution or that's what happened. Observing them in their own element, in their own area, can have different definitions or different meanings for each individual. I do believe that they should have had a before and after comparison because, again, that is hard to prove something if you don't know that something was already there beforehand in the beginning. And the last thing, as mentioned with the control, is just the definitions because healthy living and activity living for one person could be managing to bathe and get dressed within 30 minutes. For another person, could be getting bathed and dressed within an hour and a half. So it's the simple task, but different outcomes, different ratings, different scales, which will affect your results. As a hidden treat, at the beginning of the presentation, there was a little slide that asked to play a game. That was based off of the CIDI test method, and that method, when with this survey inclusively, was to overload an individual's stimulus, basically give you a ton of information and track one specific thing. They don't let you know what it is until the end, and then maybe you'll guess it, maybe that's what you're paying attention to, or maybe not. Throughout the slide, there were a number of different shapes, different kinds, different colors, throughout the presentation as a whole. If you paid attention to the shapes, that's what a normal human being was. That they were colored, they were different, they stood out, and that was the purpose of them. That was not going to be the stimulus question. The question that they would have asked if this was the presentation was, how many times was the number 4 referenced in this presentation? If you get the answer, if you were able to follow that, then feel free to leave a response with the answer. Of course, I'll let you know who's right and wrong. But this was a simple question that was asked, and it wasn't to confuse them, but to see what their responses were, what their cognitive functions were, what their mentality was. Did they attempt to answer the question, or did they trail off to something else or skip it? That is the end of my presentation, and I hope you enjoyed.